Karoline Leavitt was not someone who sought attention. She preferred to stay in the background, quietly observing the world around her while pouring her heart into the one thing that made her feel truly alive, playing the piano. Growing up in a small town where opportunities were scarce, Karoline had always been an outsider. While other kids played sports or gossiped about school events, she spent hours practicing scales and perfecting melodies on her grandmother's old upright piano. It wasn't glamorous, but it gave her a sense of purpose. Her love for music began when she was just 7 years old. Her grandmother, a retired music teacher, introduced her to the magic of the piano. "Every note tells a story," her grandmother would say, sitting beside her as they explored simple tunes together. Over time, Karoline grew more confident, teaching herself complex pieces by ear and dreaming of performing on big stages someday. But life in her small town didn't offer much room for dreams like hers. Still, she persisted, entering local competitions and playing at community events whenever she could. One crisp autumn evening, fate decided to step in. Karoline received an invitation to attend a prestigious music gala hosted by the city's most celebrated arts foundation. The event promised performances from some of the greatest musicians in the country, including Victor Langston, a name everyone knew. Victor was famous not only for his incredible talent, but also for his sharp wit and often harsh opinions about others' abilities. He was known to be brutally honest, sometimes crossing the line into rudeness. Despite this reputation, people admired him because he was undeniably brilliant. Nervous yet excited, Karoline put on her best dress and made the trip to the city. The gala was held in a grand hall adorned with glittering chandeliers and velvet curtains. Guests mingled over champagne, discussing the latest trends in classical music and sharing stories about their favorite composers. Karoline felt out of place among these sophisticated strangers, but she reminded herself why she was there: to celebrate music, not to impress anyone. As luck would have it, Karoline ended up sitting next to none other than Victor Langston himself. At first, she tried to avoid drawing attention to herself, keeping her eyes downcast and sipping her drink slowly. But then, during a lull in conversation, someone nearby mentioned that Karoline enjoyed playing the piano. Curious glances turned toward her, and before she could respond, Victor leaned back in his chair and raised an eyebrow. "Oh? An amateur pianist?" he said, his tone dripping with skepticism. "How charming. Do tell me, what do you play? Twinkle, twinkle, little star?" A few people chuckled nervously, unsure how to react. Karoline felt her cheeks flush, but she forced herself to meet his gaze. "Actually, I enjoy Rachmaninoff," she replied softly, surprising even herself with her boldness. Victor's smirk widened. "Rachmaninoff, my dear, works like that require skill and discipline. Perhaps you should stick to simpler pieces until you're ready." His words stung, but Karoline refused to let them break her spirit. Instead of retreating into silence, she squared her shoulders and looked him straight in the eye. "If you think I'm incapable, maybe we should find out," she suggested, surprising everyone, including herself. The room fell silent for a moment before erupting into murmurs of excitement. Someone joked that they should settle this with a friendly competition right there at the gala. To Karoline's astonishment, Victor agreed, clearly amused by the idea of taking on an amateur. The challenge was set. Later that night, Karoline and Victor would perform together in front of the entire audience. The stakes couldn't have been higher. For Karoline, this was either going to be the most humiliating moment of her life or the chance to prove herself against all odds. As the reality of what she had agreed to sank in, she felt a mix of fear and determination bubbling inside her. Could she really hold her own against someone like Victor Langston? Though intimidated by the thought of facing such a legendary figure, Karoline reminded herself of all the hours she had spent practicing. She thought about the countless nights she had stayed up late, determined to master difficult passages. She remembered the joy she felt every time she hit the right notes and brought a melody to life. If nothing else, this was her opportunity to show the world and herself that she belonged here, among people who loved music as deeply as she did. As the evening wore on, anticipation built among the guests. Whispers filled the air as people speculated about the upcoming duel. Some doubted Karoline's ability to keep up with Victor, while others secretly rooted for the underdog. Regardless of the outcome, one thing was certain. This was going to be a performance no one would forget anytime soon. As the evening unfolded, Karoline found herself retreating to a quiet corner of the grand hall. The buzz of conversation and clinking glasses faded into the background as she tried to steady her racing thoughts. Victor's mocking words echoed in her mind. Perhaps you should stick to simpler pieces until you're ready. Though she had managed to respond with quiet confidence, the sting of his condescension lingered. It wasn't just his words that bothered her. It was the way he dismissed her so casually, as if her passion for music didn't matter at all. Karoline sat down on a plush velvet chair near a large window, gazing out at the city skyline bathed in soft golden light. Her hands rested on her lap, fingers twitching instinctively as if they longed to find their way back to the piano keys. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath, trying to focus. This wasn't how she imagined her night would go. She had come to the gala simply to enjoy the performances, maybe even learn something new from the great musicians who were gathered here. But now, she was thrust into the spotlight, challenged by one of the most celebrated pianists in the world. Her heart pounded as she replayed the events leading up to this moment. How had she ended up agreeing to such an impromptu duel? She wasn't sure whether it was courage or sheer stubbornness that made her accept the challenge. Maybe it was both. Deep down, Karoline knew she couldn't back down, not after being mocked so openly. If she did, she'd always wonder what might have happened if she had stood her ground. And yet doubt crept in like a shadow. What if she failed? What if she embarrassed herself in front of everyone? To distract herself, Karoline began thinking about her journey, the countless hours spent practicing, the sacrifices she had made along the way. She remembered the first time her grandmother placed her tiny hands on the piano keys, guiding them gently as they played "Mary Had a Little Lamb" together. Back then, music seemed like magic, a secret language only she and her grandmother understood. As she grew older, her love for the piano deepened. She started tackling more challenging pieces, spending late nights hunched over sheet music, determined to master every note. There were moments when giving up felt easier than pushing forward. When she was 12, her family faced financial difficulties, and they almost sold her grandmother's old piano. Karoline begged them not to, promising to take care of it herself. From that day on, she polished its worn surface religiously, treating it like a treasure. During high school, while her classmates went to parties and football games, she stayed home practicing tirelessly. Friends teased her for being too serious, but Karoline didn't mind. Music was her escape, her sanctuary, and her greatest joy. Now, sitting alone in the corner of the gala, those memories gave her strength. She reminded herself why she loved playing the piano. It wasn't about impressing others or winning competitions. It was about telling stories through music, sharing emotions that words alone couldn't express. Every piece she played carried a part of her soul, and tonight she wanted to share that with the audience, no matter how daunting the task seemed. But doubt still lingered. Victor Langston was a legend for a reason. His technical skill was unmatched, and his ability to captivate an audience bordered on supernatural. Karoline had watched videos of his performances online, marveling at the way his fingers danced across the keys with effortless precision. How could she possibly compete with someone like him? The thought sent a shiver down her spine. Just then, a familiar voice interrupted her thoughts. "You look like you're about to face a firing squad," said Claire, a friend from her hometown who happened to be attending the gala as well. Claire slipped into the seat beside her, offering a warm smile. "Are you okay?" Karoline hesitated before nodding. "I'm fine," she replied, though her trembling hands betrayed her nerves. "It's just, I don't know if I can do this." Claire tilted her head, studying her closely. "Do you really think Victor believes you can't play, or is he just trying to intimidate you?" The question caught Karoline off guard. She hadn't considered that possibility. Was Victor's mockery less about her abilities and more about his own ego? Perhaps he didn't expect her to rise to the occasion, assuming she'd shrink away in fear. The thought ignited a spark of defiance within her. She didn't want to give him the satisfaction of seeing her doubt herself. "You've worked so hard for this," Claire continued, placing a reassuring hand on Karoline's shoulder. "Don't let anyone make you forget how talented you are. Just focus on the music. Let it speak for itself." Her words struck a chord. Karoline realized that she didn't need to prove anything to Victor, or anyone else for that matter. This performance wasn't about competing, it was about staying true to herself. She had poured her heart into every practice session, every recital, and every melody she ever played. That dedication wasn't something anyone could take away from her. With renewed determination, Karoline stood up, smoothing her dress as she prepared to face the inevitable. She glanced at the stage where two gleaming grand pianos awaited her and Victor. The sight filled her with a mix of excitement and apprehension. She knew the next few hours would test her resolve, but she also knew she couldn't back down now. Whatever happened, she vowed to play with everything she had, to let the music flow freely and authentically, without fear or hesitation. As she returned to the main hall, the atmosphere buzzed with anticipation. Guests whispered excitedly, speculating about the upcoming duel. Some expressed admiration for Karoline's bravery, while others remained skeptical of her chances against Victor. Karoline tuned out the noise, focusing instead on the rhythm of her breathing and the melodies swirling in her mind. She visualized herself seated at the piano, her fingers gliding effortlessly over the keys, losing herself in the beauty of the music. For the first time that evening, Karoline felt a sense of calm wash over her. She wasn't naive enough to believe she could outplay Victor Langston, but she also knew she had something unique to offer. Her interpretation of the music came from a place of genuine emotion, shaped by years of personal struggles and triumphs. And perhaps, just perhaps, that authenticity would resonate with the audience in ways even Victor couldn't anticipate. As the clock ticked closer to the performance, Karoline embraced the challenge ahead. No matter the outcome, she was ready to step onto that stage and let her music do the talking. The grand hall buzzed with anticipation as the moment everyone had been waiting for finally arrived. The lights dimmed slightly, casting a warm glow over the audience, who were now seated in perfect silence, their eyes fixed on the stage. Two gleaming grand pianos stood side by side, like twin sentinels ready to bear witness to an extraordinary musical showdown. Karoline took a deep breath and stepped forward, her heels clicking softly against the polished wooden floor. She could feel the weight of hundreds of pairs of eyes on her, but she forced herself to focus, to block out the whispers and the nervous energy swirling around her. Victor Langston appeared moments later, exuding confidence as he strode toward the stage. His presence commanded attention. There was no denying his star power. Dressed impeccably in a tailored suit, he carried himself with an air of authority that seemed almost intimidating. He glanced at Karoline briefly, his expression unreadable, before taking his place behind one of the pianos. For a fleeting second, Karoline wondered if he saw her as nothing more than a minor inconvenience, a blip in his otherwise illustrious career. But she quickly shook off the thought. Tonight wasn't about Victor, it was about proving something to herself. A hush fell over the room as the moderator approached the microphone to introduce them. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice rich and resonant, "tonight we have the rare privilege of witnessing a unique collaboration between two very different musicians. On my left we have the incomparable Victor Langston, whose mastery of the piano needs no introduction." Polite applause rippled through the crowd, accompanied by murmurs of admiration. Victor gave a slight nod, acknowledging the praise with practiced ease. "And on my right," the moderator continued, gesturing toward Karoline, "we welcome Karoline Leavitt, a passionate musician whose journey has brought her here tonight to share her love for music with all of us." The applause this time was softer, tinged with curiosity. Some attendees clapped politely, while others leaned forward in their seats, eager to see how this unexpected pairing would unfold. Karoline felt a lump rise in her throat as she settled onto the bench in front of her piano. Her fingers hovered above the keys, trembling ever so slightly. She stole another glance at Victor, who sat poised and composed, radiating calm assurance. He adjusted his cuffs meticulously, then rested his hands lightly on the keyboard, as though preparing to deliver a masterclass rather than engage in a friendly duel. The contrast between them couldn't have been starker. Karoline, the underdog, visibly nervous, yet determined. And Victor, the seasoned professional, brimming with self-assurance. The moderator cleared his throat, his tone growing more animated as he announced the piece they would perform together. For tonight's challenge, our musicians will tackle Sergei Rachmaninoff's Prelude in C-sharp minor, a work renowned not only for its technical complexity, but also for its emotional depth. Gasps rippled through the audience. Even those unfamiliar with classical music recognized the enormity of the task ahead. This wasn't just any prelude. It was a notoriously difficult piece that demanded precision, control, and raw passion. It was the kind of composition that separated amateurs from professionals, and everyone knew it. Karoline's heart skipped a beat. Of all the pieces they could have chosen, why did it have to be this one? She had practiced it countless times, of course, but never under such pressure. Her mind raced as she recalled the intricate passages and thunderous chords that required both strength and finesse. Could she really pull this off in front of a room full of critics and enthusiasts? Beside her, Victor let out a low chuckle, barely audible but unmistakable. He turned to look at Karoline, his lips curling into a smirk. "Well, well," he said, his voice dripping with mockery. "It seems fate has decided to test your mettle. Shall we begin?" Karoline clenched her jaw, refusing to let his taunts rattle her further. She nodded curtly, her gaze fixed on the sheet music in front of her. The moderator signaled for quiet, and the room grew so still that you could hear the faint hum of the chandeliers above. Then, with a dramatic flourish, Victor launched into the opening bars of the prelude. From the very first note, it was clear that Victor meant business. His playing was dazzling. Every keystroke precise, every dynamic shift executed with flawless timing. The rich, thunderous chords filled the hall, reverberating off the walls and sending shivers down the spines of the listeners. It was impossible not to be awestruck by his virtuosity. Each note seemed to leap off the page, alive and electrifying, as if Victor were channeling the spirit of Rachmaninoff himself. The audience watched in rapt silence, mesmerized by the sheer power of his performance. When it came time for Karoline's section, many expected hesitation or faltering. After all, how could anyone follow such a commanding display without crumbling under the pressure? But when Karoline placed her hands on the keys, something remarkable happened. Her initial touch was tentative, almost cautious, but within seconds, she found her rhythm. Her interpretation of the piece was entirely different from Victor's. It was softer, more introspective, yet no less compelling. Where Victor had dazzled with technical brilliance, Karoline captivated with emotion. Her fingers moved across the keys with a fluid grace, weaving a tapestry of sound that tugged at the heartstrings of everyone present. Notes flowed seamlessly, each one imbued with meaning and feeling. She played as though she were telling a story, drawing the audience into her world. There was a vulnerability in her performance that resonated deeply, evoking images of longing, hope, and resilience. People leaned forward in their seats, completely absorbed, forgetting for a moment that they were witnessing a competition. Instead, they were experiencing something far greater, a connection forged through music. As the piece progressed, the interplay between the two pianists became almost hypnotic. Victor returned to the spotlight with a series of rapid arpeggios, his technique as impeccable as ever. Yet when Karoline rejoined him, her melodies intertwined with his in a way that felt harmonious rather than competitive. It was as if the music itself had taken on a life of its own, transcending the egos of the performers. Together, they created a soundscape that was both breathtaking and profoundly moving. By the time they reached the final crescendo, the entire hall was spellbound. The last crashing chord echoed through the space, hanging in the air like a suspended breath before fading into silence. For a moment, no one dared to move. Then slowly, the audience erupted into applause, thunderous, heartfelt, and unstoppable. People rose to their feet, cheering and clapping until their hands hurt. Some wiped tears from their eyes, overwhelmed by what they had just witnessed. Others simply stared in awe, unable to find words to describe the magic they had experienced. Karoline sat frozen at her piano, her chest rising and falling as she tried to process what had just happened. She had done it. Despite her nerves, despite the overwhelming odds stacked against her, she had held her own against one of the greatest pianists in the world. And more importantly, she had stayed true to herself, letting her love for music shine through every note she played. Beside her, Victor remained seated for a moment longer, his expression unreadable. Then slowly he turned to face Karoline. To her surprise, there was no trace of arrogance or condescension in his eyes, only genuine respect. He extended a hand toward her, nodding slightly as if to acknowledge her triumph. Karoline hesitated for a fraction of a second before accepting his gesture, shaking his hand firmly. In that brief exchange, something shifted. What had started as a rivalry born out of mockery had transformed into mutual admiration, a shared understanding of the power of music to unite even the most unlikely of duos. As the applause continued to swell around them, Karoline allowed herself a small, relieved smile. She had faced her fears head-on and emerged victorious, not because she had beaten Victor, but because she had proven to herself that she belonged on that stage. And in doing so, she had silenced not only her critics but also the doubts that had haunted her for so long. The applause in the grand hall was deafening, a tidal wave of sound that seemed to lift Karoline off her feet. She sat frozen at the piano, her hands resting lightly on the keys, as if afraid to move and break the spell of the moment. Her heart raced, not from exertion but from the overwhelming realization that she had just done something extraordinary. For years she had played music for small audiences, family members, friends, and occasional strangers at local recitals, but nothing could have prepared her for this. The sheer scale of the reaction was staggering. People were on their feet clapping wildly, some whistling, others shouting words of admiration. The energy in the room was electric, charged with awe and excitement. Karoline felt tears pricking at the corners of her eyes, though she blinked them back quickly. This wasn't the time to cry. It was the time to absorb every second of what she had accomplished. She glanced around the hall, taking in the sea of faces illuminated by the soft glow of the chandeliers. Many looked genuinely moved, wiping away tears or leaning toward one another to whisper excitedly. A few even pressed their hands over their hearts as if the music had touched something deep within them. Beside her, Victor Langston remained seated for a moment longer, his expression thoughtful. He didn't join in the applause, nor did he immediately rise to bask in the adoration of the crowd. Instead, he turned slightly toward Karoline, studying her with an intensity that made her nervous all over again. His earlier smirk was gone, replaced by something far more complex, a mix of surprise, respect, and perhaps even a hint of admiration. It was as if he hadn't expected her to rise to the occasion quite so spectacularly. "You've got guts," he said finally, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "I'll give you that." Karoline managed a small, hesitant smile. "Thank you," she replied softly, unsure of what else to say. She half expected him to follow up with another biting remark, but instead he stood and offered her a hand. It was a simple gesture, yet it carried immense weight. By extending his hand, Victor was acknowledging her, not just as a participant in their impromptu duel, but as an equal, someone who deserved recognition for her talent and effort. For a moment, Karoline hesitated. Part of her wanted to refuse, to let the applause speak for itself, without needing validation from him, but another part of her understood the significance of the moment. Accepting his hand wasn't about conceding victory, it was about mutual respect. Slowly, she reached out and shook his hand, her grip firm despite the trembling in her fingers. The audience roared even louder, interpreting the gesture as a sign of camaraderie between two formidable musicians. As they both rose from their benches, the moderator stepped forward once more, beaming with pride. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, raising his arms to quiet the crowd, "what we have witnessed tonight is nothing short of miraculous. Music has the power to transcend boundaries, to bring people together, and to remind us of our shared humanity. And tonight, these two remarkable artists have shown us exactly that." The audience erupted into applause again, and Karoline felt a warmth spread through her chest. For the first time that evening, she allowed herself to fully embrace the moment. She wasn't just an amateur pianist anymore. She was someone who had proven herself capable of standing alongside the best. The doubt and fear that had plagued her earlier melted away, replaced by a quiet confidence. She had faced her fears head-on and emerged victorious, not because she had won against Victor, but because she had stayed true to herself and let her passion shine through. Victor, too, seemed affected by the performance. As he took a step back to allow Karoline to take center stage, there was a subtle shift in his demeanor. Gone was the arrogant maestro who had mocked her earlier. In his place stood a musician who recognized greatness when he saw it. He gestured for her to come forward, encouraging her to accept the spotlight. Karoline hesitated briefly before stepping up, her cheeks flushing as the applause grew even louder. "Karoline Leavitt," the moderator exclaimed, his voice filled with enthusiasm. "Let's hear it one more time for this incredible young woman." The ovation was thunderous, a testament to the impact her performance had made. Karoline bowed slightly, her movements graceful but modest. She didn't want to make the moment about herself. It was about the music, the connection she had forged with the audience and the journey that had led her here. As she stood there, basking in the glow of the crowd's appreciation, she couldn't help but think about all the people who had supported her along the way. Her grandmother, whose lessons had laid the foundation for her love of music, her parents who had sacrificed so much to keep her dream alive, and her friends who had cheered her on even when she doubted herself. After several minutes of sustained applause, the moderator signaled for silence once more. "Before we conclude this unforgettable evening," he said, addressing the audience, "I'd like to invite Mr. Langston to share a few words. Victor?" Victor stepped forward, adjusting the microphone to suit his height. For a man known for his sharp tongue and cutting remarks, he appeared surprisingly reflective. "When I agreed to this little experiment," he began, pausing to choose his words carefully, "I must admit I didn't expect much. I thought it would be entertaining, perhaps amusing. What I didn't anticipate was being humbled." A ripple of laughter ran through the audience, though it was clear that Victor wasn't joking. He continued, his tone growing more serious. "Music isn't just about technical skill or flawless execution. It's about emotion, storytelling, and connecting with your audience on a deeper level. Tonight, Karoline reminded me, and hopefully all of us, of why we fell in love with music in the first place. She may not have my years of experience, but she has something equally valuable: authenticity. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is something no amount of practice can teach." His words hung in the air, met with stunned silence followed by thunderous applause. Even Karoline was taken aback. She had never imagined hearing such praise from someone like Victor, whose reputation for harsh criticism preceded him wherever he went. Yet here he was, openly admitting that he had underestimated her, and doing so with grace and humility. As the gala drew to a close, guests lingered in the hall, reluctant to leave the magic of the evening behind. Many approached Karoline to congratulate her, shaking her hand and offering heartfelt compliments. Some shared personal stories about how her performance had resonated with them, while others simply expressed their admiration for her courage and talent. It was overwhelming but deeply gratifying, a reminder of the profound impact music could have on people's lives. One guest, an elderly woman with silver hair and kind eyes, pulled Karoline aside. "My dear," she said, her voice trembling with emotion, "you reminded me of my late husband tonight. He used to play Rachmaninoff, and hearing you brought back memories I thought I'd lost forever. Thank you for that." Karoline felt a lump rise in her throat. "That means so much to me," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "Music has a way of bringing people together, doesn't it?" The woman nodded, patting Karoline's hand affectionately before moving on. Moments like these reinforced why Karoline had dedicated her life to playing the piano. It wasn't about fame or accolades. It was about creating connections, evoking emotions, and leaving a lasting impression on those who listened. As the night wore on, Karoline found herself reflecting on everything that had transpired. From the initial mockery to the triumphant performance, the evening had been a whirlwind of emotions. But through it all, she had discovered something invaluable: her own resilience. She had faced one of her greatest fears, performing in front of a critical audience, and had not only survived but thrived. More importantly, she had stayed true to her art, allowing her passion to guide her rather than succumbing to self-doubt. Standing near the exit, watching the last of the guests file out, Karoline caught sight of Victor speaking with a group of admirers. Their eyes met briefly, and he gave her a subtle nod, a silent acknowledgement of the bond they had formed through music. It wasn't friendship, not yet, but it was a start. In that moment, Karoline realized that the evening had changed her in ways she couldn't fully comprehend. She had walked into the gala as an unknown pianist from a small town, but she was leaving as someone who had silenced critics, won over skeptics, and inspired countless others. And as she stepped out into the cool night air, the city lights twinkling like stars above her, Karoline knew one thing for certain: this was only the beginning. The days following the gala passed in a blur for Karoline. What had started as a single, unforgettable evening quickly spiraled into something far greater, a whirlwind of attention and opportunities that she could scarcely have imagined just a week before. The performance had been recorded, unbeknownst to her at the time, and snippets of it were uploaded online by attendees eager to share the magic they had witnessed. Within hours, videos of Karoline playing went viral, spreading across social media platforms like wildfire. Her name became synonymous with perseverance, authenticity, and raw talent. At first, Karoline was overwhelmed. Notifications flooded her phone, each one bringing a new message of admiration or encouragement. Strangers from all over the world reached out to tell her how much her music had moved them. Some shared personal stories of struggle and triumph, saying that her performance had inspired them to keep pushing forward despite their challenges. Others simply expressed gratitude for reminding them of the beauty of classical music. It was humbling, to say the least, but also deeply gratifying. For someone who had spent most of her life quietly pursuing her passion, this sudden spotlight felt surreal. Local news outlets picked up the story next, framing it as a classic underdog tale. The unknown pianist who stood her ground against a legendary maestro and won, not through competition, but through sheer artistry. Reporters clamored to interview her, asking questions about her journey, her inspirations, and what it felt like to silence critics like Victor Langston. Karoline handled the attention with grace, always deflecting praise back to the music itself. "It's not about me," she would say in interviews, her voice steady and sincere. "It's about the power of music to connect people and tell stories." But the recognition didn't stop there. Prestigious conservatories began reaching out, offering scholarships and invitations to audition. Orchestras extended offers for collaborations, eager to work with the young pianist whose emotional depth had captivated so many. Even renowned composers contacted her, intrigued by her ability to breathe new life into classic pieces. Each opportunity was exciting, yet daunting. Karoline knew this was her chance to take her career to the next level, but she also worried about losing sight of why she loved music in the first place. Amid the chaos, Victor Langston emerged as an unexpected ally. After the gala, he had taken a keen interest in Karoline's development, recognizing her potential and wanting to nurture her. To everyone's surprise, including Karoline's, he offered to mentor her. At first, she was hesitant. How could she trust someone who had mocked her so openly just days earlier? But Victor's sincerity soon became evident. He wasn't offering guidance out of obligation or guilt. He genuinely believed in her talent and wanted to help her refine. Their first meeting took place in Victor's private studio, a spacious room filled with instruments, sheet music, and awards lining the walls. Karoline arrived nervously, unsure of what to expect. Would he revert to his old ways, criticizing her every move? Or would he truly honor his promise to support her growth? As it turned out, neither scenario unfolded. Instead, Victor approached their session with a professionalism and warmth that disarmed her completely. "Let's start with something simple," he said, gesturing toward the piano. "Play whatever comes naturally to you. No pressure, no expectations." Karoline hesitated for a moment before placing her hands on the keys. She chose a piece she had been working on recently, a Chopin nocturne that required both technical precision and emotional nuance. As she played, Victor listened intently, his sharp eyes following her every movement. When she finished, he nodded thoughtfully. "You have a gift," he said, his tone devoid of sarcasm or condescension. "Your interpretation is unique, full of feeling. But technique matters too. Let me show you how we can make it even stronger." Over the next few weeks, Victor worked closely with Karoline, helping her refine her skills while encouraging her to stay true to her artistic voice. He pushed her to explore new genres and styles, challenging her to step outside her comfort zone. Under his guidance, she tackled complex compositions she had once thought impossible to master. Yet throughout their sessions, Victor never lost sight of what made Karoline special: her ability to infuse every note with emotion and meaning. Their partnership evolved into something neither of them had anticipated, a mutual respect that transcended their initial rivalry. Victor admitted to Karoline that her performance at the gala had reminded him of why he fell in love with music in the first place. In turn, Karoline came to see Victor not as a harsh critic, but as a passionate musician dedicated to preserving the integrity of classical music. Together, they proved that mentorship could arise from the unlikeliest of circumstances. As word of their collaboration spread, public perception of Victor began to shift as well. Once viewed as arrogant and dismissive, he was now praised for championing emerging talent and using his influence to uplift others. Critics noted the irony that the very person he had mocked had become his protégé, forging a bond rooted in mutual admiration. Their relationship served as a powerful reminder that even the fiercest rivals could find common ground when they shared a deep love for their craft. Meanwhile, Karoline's newfound fame brought its own set of challenges. Friends and acquaintances from her hometown reached out, some congratulating her, others seeking advice on pursuing their own dreams. While she appreciated their support, she found it difficult to navigate the fine line between staying grounded and embracing her success. There were moments when self-doubt crept back in, whispering that she didn't deserve all this attention. But whenever those thoughts surfaced, she reminded herself of the journey that had brought her here. The late nights practicing, the sacrifices, and the unwavering belief in her dream. One particularly memorable moment came during a televised interview where she was asked about her experience facing Victor Langston. The host leaned forward, clearly expecting a dramatic retelling of their encounter. But Karoline smiled softly, choosing her words carefully. "It wasn't about proving myself to him," she explained. "It was about proving something to myself. I realized that night that I didn't need validation from anyone else. I just needed to trust my own abilities and let the music speak for itself. And honestly, if it weren't for Victor's challenge, I might never have discovered how strong I really am." Her response resonated deeply with viewers, earning her even more admirers. People admired not only her talent, but also her humility and resilience. Karoline Leavitt had become more than just a pianist. She was a symbol of hope and determination, proof that hard work and authenticity could overcome even the toughest obstacles. By the end of the month, Karoline's life had transformed in ways she never imagined. She signed with a prestigious management agency, secured invitations to perform at international festivals, and began collaborating with artists she had long admired. Yet, despite all the changes, one thing remained constant: her love for music. No matter how busy her schedule became or how much attention she received, she never lost sight of why she played: to tell stories, evoke emotions, and create connections that transcended language and culture. And though Victor continued to play a significant role in her career, guiding her through the complexities of the classical music world, Karoline knew that her greatest strength lay within herself. She had faced her fears, defied expectations, and proven that true artistry came not from perfection, but from passion. As she prepared for her first major solo concert, she reflected on how far she had come, and how much farther she still wanted to go. This was her moment, and she intended to make the most of it. Months had passed since that fateful night at the gala, and Karoline Leavitt's life was almost unrecognizable from what it had been before. What started as a single evening of unexpected triumph had blossomed into a full-fledged career, one that took her to stages she'd only dreamed of as a child. Her performances were now eagerly anticipated events, drawing audiences not just for her technical skill, but for the emotional depth she brought to every note. Yet, despite all the accolades and opportunities, Karoline remained grounded, always, reminding herself of the journey that had led her here. Her first major solo concert was held in a historic theater, known for hosting some of the greatest musicians in history. The venue was breathtaking, a grand hall with towering ceilings, intricate frescoes, and rows upon rows of velvet seats filled with eager listeners. As Karoline stood backstage, waiting for her cue to walk onto the stage, she felt a mix of excitement and nostalgia. She thought about how far she had come, from practicing on her grandmother's old upright piano in a small-town living room to standing on the verge of performing in one of the most iconic venues in the world. When the lights dimmed and the announcer introduced her, the applause that greeted her was thunderous. Karoline stepped into the spotlight, her heart pounding but her mind calm. She bowed slightly to acknowledge the audience before taking her seat at the gleaming grand piano. For a moment, she simply sat there, letting the anticipation build. Then, with a deep breath, she placed her hands on the keys and began to play. The program she had chosen was a reflection of her journey, a mix of classical masterpieces and personal favorites, each piece carefully selected to tell a story. She opened with Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, a hauntingly beautiful composition that set the tone for the evening. As her fingers glided across the keys, the melody seemed to fill the hall with a sense of quiet introspection. The audience was spellbound, hanging on every note as if transported to another world. Next came Debussy's Clair de Lune, a piece that showcased her ability to evoke emotion through subtlety and nuance. Karoline poured her soul into the performance, letting the music flow effortlessly from her fingertips. It was as though she were painting with sound, creating images of moonlit nights and tranquil waters that lingered long after the final chord faded away. When she finished, the audience erupted into applause, many visibly moved by the experience. But it was the third piece, Rachmaninoff's Prelude in C-sharp minor, that truly electrified the crowd. This was the same piece she had played during her duel with Victor Langston, and hearing it again brought back memories of that unforgettable night. Karoline attacked the opening chords with a confidence and authority that left no doubt about her mastery of the instrument. Yet, as the piece progressed, she infused it with the same emotional intensity that had captivated listeners at the gala. By the time she reached the climactic finale, the entire hall was on its feet, cheering wildly. After the final notes echoed into silence, Karoline rose from the piano bench and bowed deeply, tears glistening in her eyes. The applause continued for several minutes, refusing to die down until she returned to the stage for an encore. For this, she chose a simpler piece, one of her grandmother's favorites. As she played, she closed her eyes, imagining her grandmother sitting in the front row, smiling proudly. It was a tribute not just to the woman who had taught her to love music, but to everyone who had supported her along the way. Backstage after the concert, Karoline was greeted by a sea of well-wishers, friends, family, colleagues, and even strangers, who had been touched by her performance. Among them was Victor Langston, who had traveled specifically to attend the concert. He approached her with a warm smile, his earlier arrogance replaced by genuine admiration. "You've done it, Karoline," he said, shaking her hand firmly. "You've proven that you belong here, not because of me or anyone else, but because of your own talent and determination." Karoline smiled back, grateful for his words. "Thank you, Victor. I couldn't have done it without your guidance. You pushed me to be better, and I'll always appreciate that. Their relationship had evolved into something neither of them could have predicted. Once rivals, they were now collaborators and friends, united by their shared passion for music. Victor continued to mentor Karoline, introducing her to influential figures in the industry and helping her navigate the challenges of fame. But more importantly, he had become a source of encouragement, always reminding her to stay true to herself. Indeed, the months that followed, Karoline's career soared to new heights. She performed in prestigious concert halls around the world, released her debut album to critical acclaim, and collaborated with renowned orchestras and musicians. Yet despite her growing success, she never lost sight of her roots. She made time to visit her hometown, playing free concerts for the community and inspiring young musicians to pursue their dreams. She also established a scholarship fund in her grandmother's name, providing financial support to aspiring pianists who lacked access to resources. One of the most rewarding aspects of her journey was seeing how her story resonated with others. People often approached her after performances, sharing how her music had touched their lives or given them hope during difficult times. A teenage girl once told her that watching her overcome adversity inspired her to audition for a conservatory, despite being told she wasn't good enough. Another man recounted how her rendition of Rachmaninoff had helped him cope with the loss of a loved one. These moments reminded Karoline of the profound impact music could have, reinforcing her belief that it was more than just notes on a page. It was a universal language capable of healing, connecting, and transforming. As her career flourished, so did her friendship with Victor. They began performing duets together, combining their unique styles to create something extraordinary. Their partnership became a symbol of unity and mutual respect, proving that even the fiercest rivals could find common ground when they shared a common goal. Audiences marveled at their chemistry, noting how their contrasting approaches complemented each other perfectly. Where Victor excelled in technical precision, Karoline shone with emotional depth, and together they created performances that left lasting impressions. Looking back on everything she had achieved, Karoline realized that none of it would have been possible without the challenges she had faced. That humiliating encounter with Victor at the gala had forced her to confront her insecurities and push beyond her limits. It had taught her that fear and doubt were natural parts of growth, but they didn't have to define her. Instead, she learned to channel those emotions into her music, using them to fuel her creativity and passion. Karoline's story became a testament to the power of perseverance, authenticity, and self-belief. She proved that success wasn't about winning competitions or earning accolades. It was about staying true to your art and letting it speak for itself. And while she had certainly earned recognition and admiration, her greatest achievement was inspiring others to pursue their dreams with courage and conviction. As she prepared for her next performance, Karoline reflected on the road ahead. There would undoubtedly be more challenges, more moments of uncertainty, and more opportunities to grow. But she faced them all with the same determination and humility that had carried her this far. Music had always been her sanctuary, her source of joy and purpose, and she intended to keep sharing it with the world for as long as she lived. And so, Karoline Leavitt continued to play. Not for fame or fortune, but because it was who she was. Every note she struck was a reminder of where she had come from and a promise of where she hoped to go. Her journey was far from over, but one thing was certain. Wherever music took her, she would face it with an open heart and a steadfast spirit.